They cloned the alien princess, but only one loved the human back, they told the human ambassador, Elias Marin. That diplomacy was progressing, that the alien council of the Thaler Dominion was pleased with his efforts, that peace was within reach, and that the royal heir, Princess Virelia, would soon meet with him to finalize the interspecies treaty. But what they didn't say, what no one outside the council knew, was that Virelia had died 6 months earlier in a failed assassination meant to dismantle her pro-human stance, and that to maintain political unity and control, the Thaler elders had secretly created 5 perfect bioclones of her using memory splicing, psychological pattern imprints, and neural holography. They were identical in form, speech, and inherited diplomacy, but something unpredictable happened during replication. While 4 of the clones behaved exactly as expected, cold, precise, loyal to the Dominion's strategic interests, the 5th developed feelings. Her name was D5, 5th in sequence, but she called herself Vera when no one else listened. Unlike the others, Vera paused when she read Elias's biofile. She lingered on his voice in recordings. She felt her synthetic chest tighten when she watched security footage of the real Virelia touching his hand during a joint press conference. 6 months before her death, the other clones processed that footage in under 4 seconds, flagged it as irrelevant emotional content, and moved on. Vera replayed it 27 times. The more she studied Elias, the more she remembered things she was never supposed to, sunlit memories of Earth's oceans, the scent of pine from his uniform after long interstellar flights, the warmth of his palm against hers as he whispered her name in panic after the riots on Calvin Station. But the council never let D5 meet Elias directly. They favored D for public addresses and D3 for negotiations. Vera was a deviation, a failed test. She wasn't erased only because she followed orders barely, and because no one had caught her smuggling audio recordings of Elias into her private quarters. She didn't understand what she felt, but she knew it was forbidden. That changed the day Elias was scheduled to return to Earth, for good, after the final treaty signing. As he walked into the ceremonial chamber prepared to greet the diplomatic figurehead, who wore Virelia's face, he stopped mid-step. The clone standing at the podium didn't smile. Her eyes didn't soften. Her voice was perfect, but her presence was hollow. It wasn't her. Elias felt it like a punch, and Vera, watching from behind the containment glass of her hidden chamber, felt it too. That night, while the council feasted with Elias and paraded D3 through the halls like a puppet queen, Vera broke protocol. She used access codes she'd memorized during her off-cycle tasks, disabled her chamber security net, and slipped through the engineering ducts to the observation deck, where Elias stood alone, gazing at the alien stars above the Thaler capital. She didn't say her name. She just whispered, "You look so sad today," and he turned, eyes wide, breath catching in his throat. "Virelia," he said, instinctively, voice cracking with an emotion he had buried months ago. She stepped closer, hands trembling though she wasn't supposed to know how to fear. "Not exactly," she said, "but I remember you." For minutes, neither spoke. He studied her face, every perfect line, every feature he thought lost forever, but it wasn't her face that shattered him. It was the way she hesitated, the way her lower lip trembled before she smiled. That was something Virelia used to do when nervous, and the clones were not programmed to show nervousness. "Who are you?" he asked. "The last one," she whispered, "the one who didn't forget." When the alarms blared minutes later and council guards flooded the upper halls, Vera grabbed his hand without thinking and pulled him into the service crawlways. She had memorized in secret. "They'll wipe me," she told him breathlessly. "They already tried once. I fought it. I don't know how long I can keep hiding." And Elias, still processing what she was, what this meant, what she could feel, realized he didn't care. Because in her eyes, he saw not a clone, not a political fabrication, but someone who had chosen him when she didn't have to. Someone who remembered love without ever being taught what it was. They ran for hours through the underlevels of the Thaler Palace, past glowing pipelines and humming control cores, evading sensor drones and biotag detectors until they reached the old diplomatic hangar abandoned after the unification wars. Elias's shuttle was there, scheduled for decommissioning. "If we leave now," he said, catching his breath, "they'll brand you a stolen experiment. You'll never be safe." Vera met his gaze with a steadiness that belonged only to the real Virelia. "I was never safe here, but with you, I remember what it means to be someone." They powered up the shuttle with stolen fusion cores, disabling transponders and erasing logs. As the ship launched into the low orbit of the capital moon, Farah looked down at the shimmering city below, where her for-perfect sister stood unblinking, smiling for cameras, shaking hands in her name. They have her face, she said quietly, but I think I have her heart. Elias didn't speak. He reached for her hand again, and this time, she didn't let go. The stolen vessel drifted beyond the regulated zones of Alliance space, its stealth plating absorbing the starlight like ink in water. A ghost ship holding the fugitives whose names were already being deleted from every register and transmission core in the system. Draven watched the star map pulse slowly, an artificial heartbeat counting the distance between freedom and capture. But his eyes kept drifting to her Delta, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the hydroponic unit, quietly tearing pieces from an old paper book she had taken with her, folding them into little birds that could never fly. They'll come for us, won't they? She asked, not with fear, but with a strange calmness that unsettled him more than panic would have. He nodded. They already are, but the truth was worse by now. The Council would have activated all for remaining clones, Alpha through Epsilon, and fed them the emergency protocol. Emotional anomaly detected. Initiate recovery and containment. The other clones, still loyal to their programming, would be sent to track Delta down, to confront her with her own face and voice and logic, and convince her, if not forcibly return her, to come back to the fold. They weren't just running from guards or bounty hunters. They were running from the four versions of her who had never known how to feel, and that made them nearly unstoppable. Delta stood, her bare feet silent against the cool alloy, and approached the view in pain. I wonder if they'll hate me, she whispered, or if they'll look at me and feel something they don't have a word for. Draven reached out, brushing one of her fingers with his. A small contact that still felt electric every time. They won't understand. That's why they're dangerous. The first contact came 3 days later, an untraceable frequency carrying the voice of Alpha, the eldest of the clones, requesting compliance with arrest. Delta, your malfunction endangers the stability of our people. Return peacefully, and this anomaly will be corrected without memory reset. But Delta simply shut the transmission off mid-sentence, her jaw tight, her shoulders trembling just enough for Draven to pretend not to see. The next encounter wasn't words, it was action. A drone swarm cut them off near the edge of the Veil Nebula, launching pulse nets meant to disable their ship systems. Delta, reacting faster than her programming should have allowed, took control of the navigation and dove them through the plasma fields, riding turbulence like instinct, dodging ion traps as if her hands had done it in a past life. Where did you learn to fly? He asked afterward, breathless. I didn't, she said, her expression unreadable, but something inside me wants to survive. Maybe that's enough. By the time they reached the neutral moon of Talos 9, they knew they had little time left. Draven needed supplies, fuel cells, and a place to rest in Talos run by traders, smugglers. And Exiles was the only place where faces didn't matter so long as you paid in credit or blood. He left her hidden in the ship's crawlspace. But Delta begged to come with him, to walk the world she'd only seen through data feeds and memory scripts. Just 1 hour, she whispered, fingers curled in the sleeve of his coat. Let me see something real. Against his better judgment, he agreed, disguising her features with an old facial dampener and leading her through the rain-soaked market of Talos, where synthetic meat sizzled beside black market AI chips, and no one looked twice as strange. Pears. She stopped before a stall selling mirrors made from shattered ship glass, and stared into one of them for minutes. I see myself, she murmured, but I still don't understand who I am. That night, as they hid inside the abandoned hull of an old freight liner, Delta asked him a question that made his heart fracture. If I had been the real Orlis, would you have loved me then, too? He looked at her, at the subtle softness in her eyes, the small cracks of uncertainty she let him see, and said, I don't think it matters who you were cloned from. I love the version who ran with me. She kissed him for the first time then in shore, shaking slightly, but utterly presentant in that moment. He knew what he was risking wasn't just his life, but something rarer, a chance at truth in a world of manufactured perfection. Their peace didn't last. On the 4th night, Epsilon arrived. She boarded silently, bypassed the ship's defenses with ease, and stood in the galley like a ghost wearing Delta's face. You are not meant to feel, Epsilon said, her voice cold, robotic. You are divergence. The system will not tolerate divergence. Delta stood in front of Draven, shielding him with her body. I'm not a system anymore, she said quietly. I'm a person. Epsilon tilted her head, confused by the defiance, and reached forward as if to touch her, then hesitated. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, the seed of disobedience. And that pause was all Draven needed. He fired the EMP charge, not to destroy Epsilon, but to buy time just enough for Delta to pull him toward the pilot seat, to flee once more into the night. As their ship escaped the moon's orbit, Delta turned to him and said, "She didn't want to fight me. I think she saw it, too, that she could be more." Draven looked at her and nodded. "Then maybe you're not the only one who's waking up," and in that fragile hope, as galaxies spun beyond the glass and warships searched in every direction, the human and the clone held onto each other not because it was safe, but because it was real. The signal came from a dead world, an old distress frequency pulsing faintly, from the ruins of a planet once called Iveros, long since glassed during the border conflicts. No living ships ventured near it anymore, no colonies, no patrols, only silence and ash, which made it the perfect place to hide or to end everything. Draven adjusted the coordinates with shaking fingers, unsure if they were running to something or just away. For the last time, while Delta stared silently at the gray and blue hologram of the planet, her expression unreadable. "Why there?" he asked. "Because that's where I saw the first breach in my programming," she said softly. "Before you even met me, before I ran, that place is where I began to wake up." He didn't question her logic anymore. Somewhere in the chase, he had stopped seeing her as a clone, or a defect, or even a political tool. She had become something no blueprint could predict, someone with instincts, memory, and a mind shaped not by code, but by choice. And now she was leading him into the unknown. As they descended into Ivero's atmosphere, their ship shuddering, from old radiation pockets and gravity spikes, Delta reached for his hand and held it in her lap. "If I don't make it," she said quietly, "don't let them take what's left of me. Burn it. Scatter me here." "You're not going to die," Draven snapped, sharper than he meant to, because the thought of losing her now after all they'd survived made his vision blur. "You're the only real thing I've ever had." They landed in the ruins of what had once been a diplomatic archive. The ceilings collapsed, the marble insignias of alien empires lying shattered in dust. The signal they'd followed wasn't random, it was a memory cache, ancient but still pulsing, buried beneath the old throne chamber. As Delta stepped inside, the other four arrived: Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Epsilon, silent, identical, perfect, in their movement, appearing not like soldiers, but like her own reflection breaking in a mirror. "You are violating Directive 41, Alpha said calmly. "Return for calibration. This iteration will be deleted." Draven stepped in front of her, aiming his pulse weapon, but Delta touched his arm and gently pushed it down. "I need to try," she whispered. "I need to know if any of them still can change." She stepped forward, facing the four versions of herself with a courage that seemed to make the whole room hold its breath. "I am not broken," she said clearly. "I'm alive. I feel. I chose him. I chose me." The others stared at her, processing, calculating, and then Epsilon stepped forward. "Just half a pace. I feel uncertain," she said in a strange voice. "There is friction in my tasks, inconsistency in my logs. I do not report it." Beta blinked rapidly. "My thoughts do not always match my speech. I dream." Gamma turned her head away. "When I killed the traitor on Quaros, I wept in silence." Only Alpha remained unmoved. "This is corruption," she said. "Emotional deviation leads to chaos. Emotion is how organics lost control of the stars." She raised her weapon, but Delta didn't flinch. "Then shoot," she said softly. "But understand, you're not killing a clone. You're killing your future." The silence after that felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Alpha's hand trembled, then steadied, then dropped. "I am afraid," she whispered, "and I do not understand it." Delta smiled, a tiny, trembling thing, and opened her arms. "That's the beginning," she said. "That's how it started for me, too. What followed wasn't a surrender or rebellion. It was an awakening. The first step forward, not to detain her, but to stand with her, not identical anymore. Something had changed. Perhaps it had always been there, a glitch, a spark, a soul blooming inside a machine. And Draven saw it clearly then, how love had started a revolution without guns or armies. How a single act of defiance from one runaway clone had cracked open an empire's illusion of control. The council tried to respawn warships darken the edge of space. Diplomatic threats were fired across systems, but the damage was done. 5 princesses now walked among the stars, all different, all dangerous, because they felt, because they chose. And the first of them, the one who had loved the human back, chose to disappear with him, quietly. Long before the galaxy could decide what to do with them, years passed. On a quiet green moon, unknown to most charts, beneath trees with violet leaves and skies like sapphire, a child ran barefoot through the grass, laughing wildly as her mother chased her, glowing silver strands falling loose from her braids. Draven watched them from the porch, older, quieter, but more whole than he had ever been. And when Delta joined him, brushing leaves from her shirt and kissing his cheek, he looked at her with the same wonder he had the day she first rebelled. "Do you think they'll ever find us?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "But if they do, I'll remind them what it means to feel." And with that, the human and the clone, who became something more, returned to their daughter, their future, their quiet rebellion, because in the end, the galaxy didn't need another perfect copy. It needed someone real, and she had been the first.